The Villisca Axe Murders, a 111-year-old mystery. On June 9th, 1912, which was a Sunday, Josiah Moore and Sarah Moore took their children Herman, Catherine, Lloyd, and Paul to a church event called Children's Day, while also being joined by Lena Stillinger and Ina Stillinger, who had decided to stay overnight with the Moores. Sarah Moore was heavily involved in the planning of this event, and all of her children, as well as Lena and Ina Stillinger, had participated in the activities, including performances from them. The Children's Day event did not conclude until well after dark, and the family and their guests were walking home that evening. After coming home, given that it was getting late at night, everyone went to bed without delay. During the night, presumably around midnight, the killer, possibly multiple killers, must have entered the house after taking Josiah's axe from the yard. Once they had entered the house, incredibly brutal and violent murders ensued upon the unsuspecting family and their young guests. The morning of June 10th left the Moores' next-door neighbors wondering why the house seemed so desolate when it typically had more activity at that hour in the morning, leading Mary Peckham to call Josiah's brother to check on the family. Ross Moore arrived around 8 in the morning, finding a bloody sheet over two bodies, with blood all around the room. The bodies he had found were the two bodies of the Stillinger girls in the downstairs bedroom. Ross Moore got the marshal to come to the scene and found that every single person in the house had been murdered so horrifically it was almost unbelievable if it was not for the 8 bodies who clearly had suffered so greatly that night. While the terrible scene was unfolding in front of the marshal's eyes, he was also noticing some very strange details about the murders. Not only was the murder weapon present and partially cleaned off, but he also found a slab of bacon sitting next to the weapon. If that was not strange enough, he also found an untouched plate of food on the table, as well as a bowl of bloody water. The murder's even more of a mystery. Here is the real portrait of Moore family. Now back into the story. Around noon on the day the bodies were found, the National Guard arrived in Villisica to gain some control over the mayhem the discovery had caused amongst the townspeople, which fortunately ended the parade of fellow Villisca residents wanting to enter the home and take in the grisly scene for themselves. It was not until 10 that night that the county coroner and county attorney gave permission for the undertaker to remove the bodies from the home. The county coroner, Dr. Lindquist, called 14 witnesses to testify at the coroner's jury inquest. Some of the witnesses included brothers of Josiah Moore, the eldest sibling of the Stillinger sisters, 2 doctors who had been on the scene, neighbors, and other family and acquaintances. The second doctor that had been called to testify was Dr. F.S. Williams, who confirmed all of their heads had been beaten so brutally the Stillinger girls were unrecognizable to him, and that in every room a murder took place, blood was splattered all over. Here is the real image of Josiah and Sarah Moore. Suspects. While the perpetrator of this vile crime never got apprehended, there were a few suspects many believed to have been guilty. The 3 men that were most widely believed to have been the killer were Frank Jones, William Mansfield, or Reverend George Jacqueline Kelly, although there were other less credible suspects involved and even detained. Frank Jones was a major suspect for committing the murders and remains one of the most likely suspects in public opinion, although he was never convicted. The alleged motive for why he would want to kill the Moore family began when Josiah Moore ended his employment at Frank Jones' implement store, more commonly known as a hardware store today. After Josiah decided to stop working for Frank Jones, he went and opened his own implement store while also taking a John Deere business deal with him. causing his new business to rival with Jones. Another reason to it is there was a rumor that was never substantiated that Josiah Moore had been having an affair with Frank Jones' daughter-in-law, which regardless of its verity could add to his disdain for Josiah. William Blackie Mansfield. William Mansfield was one of the prime suspects not only in the Villisca murders but also in numerous other murders around the country. During the time of investigation, various officials who knew of Mansfield noticed that many of the details of the Villisca murders also happened to fit the details of other murders in recent times, leading to the idea he could be a serial killer. Detective James Newton Wilkerson was adamant that Mansfield had committed axe murders in Kansas and Colorado, which happened only days before the Villisca murders and carried many similarities to what happened in the Moore house. Wilkerson's theory of why he was in Villisca and why he chose the Moores was that Frank Jones had actually hired William Mansfield to kill the family. But in the end there was not enough evidence of his involvement, even including an alibi for the night of the murders. Reverend George Jacqueline Kelly. One of the last major suspects was Reverend George Jacqueline Kelly, who had a history of strange behavior and had even had acted suspiciously the morning after the murder. The Reverend had been a traveling preacher in the Midwest for years until he and his wife decided to finally settle down in Macedonia, Iowa in 1912, which is not far from Villisca, Iowa. He had been invited to the Children's Day church event that the Moores and Stillingers had attended, and seemingly fled very early the next morning around 5 in the morning and allegedly made odd comments to strangers at the train station alluding to a murder of 8 people, even though the bodies would not have been found until 8 in the morning. Even stranger than the comments he had made at the train station was the fact that he had confessed to the murders, but left the jury hung during his first trial. It took a second trial before they came to a decision and acquitted him of the murders due to lack of evidence. Conclusion: unfortunately, these murders have never been solved, and most likely will always remain unsolved. The time period this crime was committed during is regrettably one of the main reasons why there is such a gross lack of evidence. Fingerprinting technology was in its most primitive form and DNA analysis was decades away from being available. But those are not the only reasons why this case is unlikely to be solved. This case was mishandled from the very beginning due to the amount of people being allowed inside the home before any evidence had been collected, including photographs. Law enforcement and medical personnel both tampered with the crime scene while trying to investigate, which leaves us today with very few pieces of evidence, most of which are testimonials about the scene from trusted Villisca officials who had witnessed the state of the home and bodies of the family. That is it for today. Subscribe Twilight Whispers for more interesting cases and stories, and don't forget to like and share the video with your friends.